Welcome to Realms Unknown, a sci-fi and fantasy podcast brought to you by the Bugle from the side of a rushing mountain stream. If you hear some rushing in the background, it's either my mountain stream or the oncoming sine wave of doom as it approaches. The silent dark in the shrine of the dawn's last light was a heavy, accusing thing, broken only by the sputter of the single flame on the altar and the ragged, metallic rhythm of Sir Amoris's breathing. He was on his knees, an attitude of prayer that had somehow the feeling of a collapsed building. Girders bent and foundations failed. Before him, the effigy of his god, Pompous the Unyielding, stood carved from sun-bleached marble. The stone face was stern yet just, or perhaps just stern, Amoris thought, choking out a laugh that felt more like a sob. The hard white hands were outstretched, one holding the scales of justice, the other resting on the hilt of his sword. His own hands, encased in gauntlets of polished steel, were clenched into fists on his thighs. For 30 years he had looked upon the hewn face of his god and seen clarity. Now he saw only Realms Unknown! Yeah, that's right! You've just entered Realms Unknown, a weekly speculative fiction podcast brought to you by The Bugle, in which we discuss science fiction and fantasy tropes, the newest news, our favourite old shows, books, games, and more. I am your host, published author and comedian Alice Fraser, and my companion on this journey, the Severian to my Dorcas, the Rage Dunlopberry to my Carlara Batter, the Lancelot to my Arthur, the Penric to my Desdemona, the Dalinar Colin to my Caledon Stormblessed. It is Tom Neenan. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. I think I got 2 of those references. I feel like I should have to sit an exam or something before I do this. I got basically just the Arthurian one. That's the one I understood, and I look forward to discovering the rest.
Well, our subject on a deep dive for the day will be Paladins, science fiction and fantasy that does interesting stuff with the god-touched knights, and we'll get our fingers into that. But let's start with the news. Do we have any news?
There was the news of casting for the new Star Wars film, which is, I believe, called Star Wars Starfighter. Is that correct?
Yeah.
What do we think about this? This is Ryan Gosling, isn't it? Yeah.
Amy Adams, Matt Smith. Who else?
So, obviously, Ryan Gosling starring, Mia Goth, Amy Adams, Matt Smith, Danielle Ings, who I think I really like as an actor, and Simon Bird from The Inbetweeners. Really interesting for me because British comedy actors, and I'd love to be one, but British comedy actors who then go into a big franchise, I think they have a really good history of working. And I'm thinking specifically, what you think of that film, is variable. But I do think that when Adrian Edmondson appeared in The Last Jedi, was he in The Last Jedi? Yes, or was he in The Rise of Skywalker? He was in one of them. Anyway, I think did an excellent job. And now he's in Alien Earth, and he is absolutely incredible. Adrian Edmondson, the young ones, bottom, known for big performances, not a lot of nuance, but very funny. He is delivering this sinister, incredible performance in Alien Earth. And so when I saw Simon Bird's going to be in this new Star Wars film, the temptation is to be like, oh, Will from The Inbetweeners is going to be dressed as a Star Wars character. But I genuinely get excited thinking that, I don't know, that they lend another dimension to it. So we got him. We got Matt Smith, who was also rumoured to be in The Rise of Skywalker. I think there was a rumour that he was going to play a young Palpatine, but maybe got cut. This happens to Matt Smith a lot. I think he was also playing a young Ralph Fiennes in Bruges and got cut. So Matt Smith is probably playing a younger version of someone in Star Wars The Last Starfighter and will get cut. But good for him. If he's making the money and he's getting paid, then I'm delighted. Especially because I think he's a brilliant Doctor Who, obviously, a great ambassador for the show, and seems like a nice guy. I think we've been lucky with Doctor Who actors that they all seem pretty pleasant. So no, I'm excited about this film. More fool me. I am, as ever with these things, I am the Snoopy cartoon, and the football is going to be whipped out from under me as I try and kick it again, because I never learn. But I'm super excited. I think, Amy Adams. It's Amy Adams. Last sci-fi Amy Adams did was Arrival, and that's one of the best films ever made.
Which was so good. That was so good.
Incredible. An incredible film. And she's just she's incapable of bringing a bad performance. Amy Adams is one of the few Hollywood actors I think I'd go and see a film based on the fact she's in it. So I'm excited. I'm really excited for this.
And the other news that we have is that K-pop Demon Hunters is now Netflix's most watched movie of all time. There's a sequel officially in the works. This is exciting news for all 6-year-old girls out there. My only angle in on K-pop Demon Hunters is that my 6-year-old niece is now writing like aggressive songs about how she's going to send her boyfriend to hell. She doesn't have a boyfriend, but I'm for it. So yeah, I mean, I'm excited to see like it was an underdog really in terms of these things. It had not a huge budget for such a thing, and it's just outperformed everything. It is an original franchise, or I mean, it's about to become a franchise, but it's an original IP. It was done in tribute to K-pop and the phenomenon that is K-pop and the ways in which like Gen Alpha and Gen Z are leaning towards the Orient for their creative inspiration and their cultural influence in a way that, like, I don't think we've seen this, certainly not in my lifetime, people turning away from America for their pop culture, which I think is going to be fascinating to watch that play out.
It's amazing to think that Netflix sort of the two films it's most recently sort of rolled out, which are sort of big pop culture phenomenons, I guess, are this K-pop film and the Thursday Murder Club, which are like talk about covering both bases. You have got your boomer, you're entertaining the boomers and you're entertaining the Gen Alphas, and I mean it's very smart. I mean I have no cultural reference for K-pop Demon Hunters at all. Like, I should do. I speak to friends who I have a lot of crossover with. They love Doctor Who, they love, Star Wars, they love horror. And they'll also be like, oh, and I'm a massive anime fan. And it's just, sure. I think I've done this before on this show where I've been like, convince me that I'm sure anime is brilliant because so many amazing people I know think it is amazing. If any listeners out there want to give me like an absolute beginner's guide, I've seen some episodes of Evangelion, which I enjoyed. And I've obviously seen sort of, I don't know if it counts as anime, sorry, this is how ignorant I am to all this. Like I've seen the kind of My Neighbor Totoro, those kind of films, which I know is Ghibli, which I know and could well be different. And I'm sorry if I'm sounding like I'm, I'm very kind of outside of this. But yeah, please tell me what the entry ramp for loving anime is, and I promise you next time I'm on the show I'll have watched these and I will report back, and it can be like you can watch me get converted to anime in real time if you want. That's my promise to you.
Please send a voice note in to realms unknown at thebuglepodcast.com if you have a beginner's guide to anime for Tom to set him off on a quest and adventure of a lifetime. I think you got it right. We've covered the 6-year-old girls and the Gen Alphas and the Gen Zs and the Boomers, and then millennials basically self-identify as like infantilizing themselves. Ooh woo! Don't think of me as a big boy, even though they're in their 40s now. Or I've always been a grandma. I always will be a grandma. Entering my crone era. # rug life, and they can fall in between the K-pop, and then there'll be some rare and precious birds who could straddle both the Thursday Murder Club and K-pop Demon Hunters and unite within them the yin and yang of the Force. So good luck to you.
Fascinated to know who that person is.
To be fair, if I had spare time, it's probably me.
Yeah.
A reminder to subscribe to the Bugle channel, where all of the Bugle family is situated, and all the books that we cover here will be in our affiliate store. There's a link in the show notes. If you buy through there, we don't it doesn't charge you more, but we take some minuscule kickback. Your ad section now, because you can't be what you can't buy. Greetings, righteous listener. Do you struggle with the existential dread that comes from smiting evil in a morally complex world? Does the constant grinding of plate metal in your armor keep you up at night? You're not alone. Try Better Help today. Our angelic choirs man the prayer helplines 24 hours a day and can do your therapy over text for people who prefer vellum to eye contact. That's betterhelp.com for 20% off. Try chopping 20% off with your sword. I just realized that I have a .com in an era where there is vellum scrolls. Don't question it too much. Are your righteous endeavors being undermined by unrighteous chafing? Do you just want to bring justice to the land, but your inner thighs feel like you've been getting unrighteous fellatio from a demonic force? Fear not, warrior. Introducing Sacred Salve. Formulated by cloistered clerics from aloe vera blessed by a drowsy sun spirit, Sacred Salve provides 24-hour protection against friction, heat, and the general discomfort of being armored for the Lord. Remind your fellow adventurers of a noble summit, not a goblin's locker room. So you focus on your oath instead of your rash. Sacred Salve, because holiness shouldn't rub you the wrong way. Functionally, just half a glass of water with some herbs in. And this episode of the podcast is brought to you by the Codex of Conditional Chivalry. Another day, another necromancer's lair cleansed, but at what cost? My sword arm is heavy, my soul is heavier. What if I'm the bad guy? The Codex of Conditional Chivalry isn't just a book, it's a flowchart for your conscience. Over 500 pages of meticulously cross-referenced ethical dilemmas. Is it okay to lie to a corrupt official? See page 243, subsection B, paragraph 4, lies of omission in service to a greater good. Sure, she's a maiden, but she's also a bitch. Page 12, types of women. Can I keep the dragon's hoard if I donate 15% to the temple? Page 512, chart C, the tithing threshold for ill-gotten gains. Use promo code Realms Unjustice for free shipping. The Codex of Conditional Chivalry.
Today's episode is brought to you by reel-to-reel tape recorders. Nothing says retrofuturism like reel-to-reel tape recorders. What can they do? Everything, from computing to processing, and to being a reel-to-reel tape recorder. You can't get over how easy they are as set dressing and could be used from anything. They're just two circles with a line in between. Reel-to-reel tape recorders. Good for everything, for all occasions.
And Tom, what have you been putting into your brain recently?
There's a new book that I'm very excited about by a guy called Grady Hendrix, which I haven't read yet, but he sort of has this style, which is sort of a slightly poppy style of writing, which I really enjoy. He wrote, like, I'll give you an example of the titles that really give you a sort of thing of his writing. My Best Friend's Exorcism, How to Sell a Haunted House, The Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires. So there's a comedy bent to horror. And he's just got one coming out called, which I haven't read yet, called Witchcraft for Wayward Girls, which all sound really fun and totally up my alley. And I'm sorry to say I haven't read enough of these. I bought my Best Friend's Exorcism and haven't got around to reading it yet. But one that I did read is a book he wrote called Horrorstör, which came out about 10 years ago, which is sort of a horror comedy book set in a kind of fictionalized version of IKEA. And not only is it really fun, but like his books as well. Like I think my Best Friend's Exorcism is sort of designed, like the whole book is designed to look like an old VHS cover from like the Video Nasties kind of era of VHSs. So sort of when he creates things, it's often from like everything from like the aesthetic to the title and everything, and I kind of really like that. I like that when there's interplay between sort of how a book feels in your hand and its content as well. And Horrorstör is the cover of it and the sort of the shape of it is like an IKEA catalogue. So the cover is, if you sort of were glancing at it, you think it just looked like an IKEA catalogue, but actually it's this novel about sort of demons that that invade this store overnight and kind of the history of it and things. So in preparation for his new book, I reread Horrorstör, which I really enjoyed, and I'd recommend anyone if you want. Maybe if you want a bit of horror, but you don't want it one too horrific, you want it there to be sort of an on-ramp, if you will. Something that's also a bit funny or a bit kind of quirky in some way, then I would really recommend Grady Hendrix's books. And like I say, Witchcraft for Wayward Girls has already come out, but I haven't read it yet. That was a 2025 release. And yeah, it just feels nice. It looks good on the shelf, and I like his style of writing. It's very accessible. It's not, it's not too tricky, I guess. And once again, I like asking our listeners for any recommendations for any books as well, where there's like interplay between the feel of the book, the aesthetic of the book, and the content. Specifically, if it's like horror based or if it's fantasy based, then I'm a huge sucker for that. So any recommendations for that, I would be absolutely keen to do so. And once I've read Witchcraft for Wayward Girls, I will report back and tell you what I thought of that one and if it lived up to my high expectations for it.
Please do. I have been, since reading Sword Heart, which I mentioned to you in our last episode, been getting into T. Kingfisher, who I have been being recommended for many years. This is Ursula Vernon writing as T. Kingfisher, and have been immensely enjoying. Although I've done that thing where I've just sort of churned through a bunch of her stuff and therefore am seeing sort of the reiterations of certain character archetypes that sort of come back. So particularly in the universe that's called the Temple of the White Rat, the
Mm.
first books are the Clockwork Boys and the Wonder Engine, a duology in which there is a central character who's a forger and the sort of the paladin, the fallen paladin, who has been briefly possessed by a demon and abandoned by the god. And then later on in the series, there is Paladin's Grace, in which the paladin has the god is dead, but functionally a very similar thing. This character type recurs of the paladin, the righteous, not necessarily very bright, certainly very focused and single-minded warrior who is used to existing in the sunshine of the god and performing these righteous acts, suddenly being left out in the cold, and what that does to that kind of character, seeking something to worship or someone to follow, or mistrusting anything, or basically seeing that functionally the same character being reborn. I'm quite enjoying it because I do like seeing these recurring things in authors' works when they're trying the same idea in a different way. But if that troubles you, then I would recommend not necessarily binging them the way I have been doing. But certainly reading about the Paladins was what made me think about our subgenre deep dive topic for this week, which will be Paladin. But before we get to that, we're going to do Trope on a Rope. Tom Neenan, as you know, each week we discuss a trope that we love to love or love to hate, or certainly notice it whenever we see it. What is your trope on a rope for this week?
So I think it plays on a trope on a rope that I've done recently, but I've been watching stuff that made me think of it kind of a slightly deeper and wondering if I don't think it's quite Minds of territory in terms of being icky, but it's just interesting. Which is, I know I've discussed in the past about like gender reveals. We've talked about like Eowyn being one where the "I am no man" kind of thing.
The best gender reveal party, I must say.
Yeah, exactly. And how they play out now, basically. So you've sort of got two versions of it. You have it where it's played as a plot twist, like in Pitch Black, or you have it played out. I guess we include Mulan in the realm of fantasy because there's a talking dragon. But things like Mulan, where we know from the beginning that there will be a gender swap going on, so it's not a twist to us, but it is sort of for the people in there as well. And whether I was sort of, I mean, I'm interested in it because I wonder if there's still, I'm seeing it happen less and less, and maybe that's because increasingly we're seeing, we're getting less binary with the way we see gender. And so the idea of like, but I'm a girl, but I'm dressed as a boy, now feels maybe less sophisticated or less like it plays into modern tropes in that way. I don't know. Be happy to be corrected, but would Mulan nowadays? I don't know. Would that work in the same way? What's your opinion?
Well, I think it's interesting because I do think there is I'm going to call it a flaw in a lot of modern fantasy writing. I don't know if it's a flaw.
Right.
It's a feature rather than a bug. People are doing it on purpose. It's not an
Hmm.
accident. Where you have
Hmm.
characters who, and it rubs me up the wrong way, which is why I call it a flaw.
Mm.
It may not. It may be the thing that stops rubbing people up the wrong way. Maybe mores have moved
Hmm.
on since mine were instilled. My buttons were installed a long
Mm.
time ago. But where somebody who's been brought up in a society that is medieval adjacent or Victorian adjacent, or has all of these sort of cultural touchstones of a time that was very unenlightened,
Hmm.
somehow has like extremely modern principles and like a sassiness and like a desire to become a doctor or whatever it happens to be, this kind of attitude
Hmm.
towards the world that is so modern. And almost every character who is important or who we are meant to like is also astonishingly either prejudice free or has their prejudices immediately overturned the moment a piece
Mm.
of evidence comes across to overturn them. And the idea that you could have a likable character who has repugnant ideals just seems to be absent. And I don't know,
Hmm.
it feels, again, I think this might be a mark of the influence of fan fiction or something, that we can't have a character
Mm.
who is like maybe really irreparably flawed, but we still like them.
Hmm.
And it feels like sort of part and parcel of this same kind of vibe that you're describing.
So, like, I haven't read all of the Game of Thrones books. Nobody has. They haven't been finished. But what I find really interesting and what I enjoyed about them is, like, Ned Stark, for instance. Ned Stark is very much. I think he represents some very. And I realise that probably the first book was written in the early 90s. Is that right? I don't know exactly when. But he's very much like, okay, you're my son, and if you're going to be a king, then you have to do some horrible things. I think he has to, like, there's an ill animal or something, and he makes his son kill it because you have to be a man, and you have to do those things. Now, Ned Stark is an infinitely sympathetic character, but obviously now you'd be like, oh, that he's quite a toxic dad. But then, of course, like you say, it's coded as medieval. So I wonder if nowadays, if it was written now, maybe not by George R. R. Martin, but someone else, to make Ned Stark more sympathetic, it'd be like he'd understand his son's, like, qualms about slaughtering an animal or killing a man, like executing someone or something, some of those things, forcing his son to watch as someone is executed, because that's how you sort of drill in power and manliness into someone. But certainly when I watched it and sort of when I read it, I accepted that Ned Stark was a product of this very specific time period. It's very interesting, yeah. And maybe I would have thought less of the characterization if, Ned Stark was a very enlightened dad who'd read all the right books and was very up to date on sort of the best ways of bringing up a son in a non-toxic way, that he would have lost something, basically.
Yeah, I find this, it's particularly prevalent, obviously, in romance novels because we're meant to be sympathetic to the central characters and, like, really invested in their
Mm.
journey. But a lot of romance novels end with having a baby, because that's the way that you
Hmm.
sort of signify in the plot. I mean, modern ones occasionally avoid it, but it's a sort of it's a shorthand for they continue to do okay after the happily ever after.
Mm.
They're fine, and the story continues in a further series with the children. But the number of mothers in romance novels who we're meant to sympathize with, who are like, "Oh no, I wouldn't give my child to a wet nurse. I know I'm idiosyncratic in that way. I'll breastfeed." Again, as a
Mm.
shorthand for, like, she's the one we're meant to, like, sympathize with or like, because now we know that you're meant to breastfeed and you wouldn't just give your child to a wet nurse when it would have been considered, like,
Yeah.
quite gross to breastfeed your child,
Yeah.
for a certain class of women at a certain period of time. You would have brought in a wet nurse without question. On the sort of the narrative that, aristocratic women were frail and waifish, and peasant women had, like, good strong milk. Um,
Got you.
problems. Problems in history. My trope on a rope
Hmm.
is firing a powder loading gun more than once or in wet weather. That taking less than a minute to load a musket and never
Hmm.
having a misfire that blows your hand off, um, is my
Hmm.
trope on a rope. I always notice it. I always think, "Oh, magic gun." I think, guns are meant to be magic in these books. I just accept that in action movies, maybe I need to bring action movies in under the category of fantasy, and just accept that all guns in action movies are magic, and that all action heroes have a shielding spell that prevents them from being machine gunned by their many oppositions.
To that end, sorry, just because I haven't mentioned, well, I've slightly mentioned it, obviously, my traditional Doctor Who references.
There's just a little witch following them around, cursing all of the henchmen to bad ape. Sorry, just off screen.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's what happened in Star Wars. That's the role that Matt Smith's going to play. Um, So there's, in the Mark of the Rani, there is a the Rani is turning. It's like the Luddite riots is where it's set, and so these Luddites are being driven mad by the Rani, who's an evil scientist, and what she's doing. And at one point, the Luddites set upon the Doctor, and George Stevenson comes along and fires his flintlock pistol into the air, and all of the Luddites flee. And the Doctor's very grateful, and Stevenson does point out that I fired my gun. I would not be able to fire my gun again for another, like, sort of 15 minutes, 10 minutes, something like that. So they're obviously not very clever, and they obviously don't understand how things work. But it's just nice to have it referenced that, yeah, firing your gun in the air when it takes that long to reload is a terrible idea, because you've basically gone, I have absolutely got rid of my ability to defend myself right now, which is the opposite of the sort of message you want to put out there.
Yeah, you fired your gun, it's essentially putting your hands in the air, being like, "I'm unarmed myself."
Exactly.
And that brings us to our subgenre deep dive for this week. The Paladin. The Paladin, the god-touched knight, beyond noble, pure of heart, and then interestingly played with in science fiction and fantasy, either too righteous, too judgmental, too cold, too unbending, or the distorted paladin serving righteously the wrong god, potentially. A lot of really interesting tropes being played out with paladins in particularly in games. I think this is where a lot of games come good. But I'm going to start with one of my favorite. As always, I'm always going to recommend Lois McMaster Bujold, Paladin of Souls. That's also been recommended in the reading list. Remember, if this is your kind of trope, have a look at the reading list that we do over on Blue Sky every week. We announce the deep dive, and over on my Patreon, patreon.com/Alice Fraser, we announce the deep dive topic, and people give their recommendations. So we're going to do a short list now, but there is a long list of further reading and seeking and seeing and playing if you are looking for it. But Paladin of Souls, the premise of the five gods world that Lois McMaster Bujold has built is that gods can only work through people in the world. And so saints are basically people who have laid down their free will, made themselves small in service to the god, and then the god can fill them up and move through them. And there's a lot of fun that is made with that. The paladin being the person who carries, in this instance, carries the souls in order to help the god to kind of bring them to rest. So really lovely. And it's got, as Lois McMaster Bujold does, has thoughtful, compassionate women at the center of a lot of her stories, which I think is just underdone, really, particularly not necessarily young women. It's nice to see. Tom, any paladin recommendations from you?
Yes, my one is sort of almost a parody of the. It's a parody paladin, if such a thing can exist, and it's from one of my favorite films of 2023 that sadly went completely underappreciated, which is Dungeons and Dragons. Which I really loved. It was sort of it's such. I think I've talked about it on this show before, but yeah, Dungeons and Dragons: Honor Among Thieves is like, it's funny. It recreates playing Dungeons and Dragons in a film in a way that I don't think any other like medium has managed to quite convey, other than obviously the actual playing of the game. And they the paladin there is called Zenk Yendar, and he's played by this incredibly good-looking actor, Regé-Jean Page, who I think is in
Oh, he
Bridgerton.
played the Bridgerton chap. Yes.
He's one of those ludicrous looking people. Like, he's just sort of too beautiful to be human, and he really plays that up in Dungeons and Dragons. Like, he's too virtuous. He's like, he annoys everyone else because he's so perfect, and it's such a, if you don't know a lot about paladins, I don't really, but he is sort of the perfect sort of Paladin 101, because he's the absolute extreme of all of those different characteristics, and is so funny. And also, it's sort of, he has to not be in the plot too long, because you realize he is perfect and he would just win everything. So in order to make there have any jeopardy, they sort of need to get him to leave the plot, because otherwise he'd just, he'd win. But he's definitely my favorite. He's like so funny and virtuous, and it's such a good representation. Because I have to, I will mention one Doctor Who thing. Doctor Who doesn't have a lot of, other than the Doctor himself, they tend to sort of not have a lot of these kind of characters. One, because warriors aren't really that venerated in Doctor Who, because it's usually more about sort of being an intellectual than it is about being a fighter. But one that I think slightly falls into this category, even though arguably he's more of like a rogue bounty hunter type, but I think has this, is a character called Orsini from Revelation of the Daleks, who is, he's the senior knight of the Grand Order of Oberon. Which is such a, like, he's in like 5 scenes, but he makes such a big impact. He is the Boba Fett of Doctor Who, even though the guy who played Boba Fett was in Doctor Who. It's in the Time Warrior. Anyway, he sort of turns up and makes this incredible appearance, and then, like, I think he's in one comic book and he's never mentioned ever again. And it's this amazing character who is sort of, he's devilish and he's a brilliant warrior, and you sort of meet him at the end of his career. and yeah, it's just so strange that no one has ever like done a prequel to this character or sort of examined it any further. But yeah, Orsini would be, I guess, and people have a go at me and say he's technically, he's not a paladin, but in Doctor Who terms, and I've got to bring it up eventually, he is sort of the closest I think you get to that kind of character, and I love him for that.
Well, I think the sort of plot problem of Paladins, you put your finger on it, which is that they are too perfect. So you need to sort of
Mm.
that Star Trek problem that Gene Roddenberry had so many that they can never act against the Star Trek code and they can never be doing something for evil or immoral reasons. That it has to be that they're mistaken or some other thing, and it makes a real difficulty for
Mm.
plotting and for making interesting stories. You can either have flawed gods or you can have broken paladins. So paladins that have been left
Right.
by the
Yeah.
god or, have these Kingfisher paladins who sort of knit to deal with their PTSD, which is quite fun. One of the recommendations that I got in the comments section on my Patreon was the paladins in DIE or Die, written by Kieron Gillen, illustrated by Stephanie Hans, which turned into then an RPG afterwards. But in that universe, the paladins get their power from particular emotions. So you have, for example, a
Oh,
grief
wow.
knight. So they who can only express their kind of or manifest their power through this particular emotion, which is really fun and interesting and says something good
Mm.
about the way that we deal with emotions. Some people mentioned Eddings, but they also mentioned that his paladins might fall a little bit into the minds of in terms of the relationships they have with other characters.
Oh, I see. Oh,
Uh,
maybe we don't want to go further into that, but I'm intrigued.
yes, well, I mean, this is the thing. You can go into the reading list as far as you want. Do you have any other
Mm.
recommendations?
In terms of paladins, so yeah, because this is very much fantasy kind of driven, I struggle to find that kind of anchoring, just because I feel I'm slightly out of it.
Well, arguably Jedi are paladins.
Oh,
Arguably, if the Force is divine,
yeah. Although then did they make it biological? At one point, did
yes.
George Lucas then make it biological with midichlorians?
But that's because we've made science our god.
Yeah. I don't think the Jedi are that good. I don't know. I'm not. Listen, I love Star Wars, but I don't think I never watch it and think, oh, the Jedi's are the cool guys. I think they're very virtuous. It's a bit like in Red Dwarf when they split off into the angels and the demons, and sort of the ship is divided into the baddies and the goodies. And sort of the joke is that the very virtuous side of the ship, while kind of wonderful, is slightly insipid and tedious. And so when they all get sort of killed one by one, we sort of enjoy it because none of us, the robe wearing kind of very virtuous people we find quite annoying. If I had to go to a Star Wars costume party, I wouldn't be putting on a dressing gown and going as a Jedi because I find them quite. I don't find them the most intriguing or beguiling characters in the Star Wars saga.
Well, this is why you need to go into our reading list and find paladins done well. That brings us to Minds of Earth. That's where we go into the deep, dark minds of things that we used to enjoy, perhaps even love, that now maybe make us feel a little bit. Ugh. So, Tom Neenan, have you got any Minds of Earth that you've been delving into?
Yes, I'm going to dive into an ism that I think gets overlooked sometimes, especially in fantasy, because it's quite an elastic one, and it's slightly to do with ageism. Because obviously, fantasy deals with people, some of whom have been around for thousands of years. So the idea of ageism sort of is a bit of anathema to the fantasy genre. But something I found coming up quite a lot recently is the "Go on without me, I've had my time," as said by some actors who are barely out of their 50s. Like, I think as as I progress in years, I find myself watching things where, like, they go, "No, you go on without me. I'll stay here and I'll hold them off." As sort of with the implication that I've lived my life, you go off and have your life. And these people are not old. Like, these people may have a grey beard, but people in their 30s have grey beards, depending on what kind of life they've led, and that kind of thing. So I do find it quite worrying sometimes. Once again, this is a trope which came up a lot. I really enjoyed the Jodie Whittaker of Doctor Who, but there were a few times where it would rely on, thank goodness, this older man is going to stay behind and blow up all the baddies so that we can escape, kind of thing. And I just find it's just quite interesting how we sort of go, it's acceptable that you go, oh, okay, this person will stay behind. They've lived their life. And you sort of think, how have they? I remember watching Poseidon as well, and I think it's Richard Dreyfuss in Poseidon, which is a remake of the Poseidon Adventure, and he sort of sacrifices himself as well with the thing of like, well, I've had my time, and I don't think he was very old at that point either. So basically, I'm just a bit like, oh no, if you're like, you can stick around for a bit longer. If you're like, I don't know, 59, you've still got some good years. You don't have to go, I'll hold them off to people who are like 37. Like, there's not that much difference in your age for that to be the case. Anyway, as someone who just sort of is, I was at my friend's 40th birthday yesterday, and it just got me thinking about, where we see people, at what age and when they sort of cease to be perceived as useful. Obviously, this sort of the thing is there. If you did a lot of fantasy is medieval coded, and in medieval times you were past it if if you hit 50, you were the old man of the village and your wisdom was unsurpassed. But I wonder, sort of you examine that now and you're like, oh, does that feel a bit grim? I don't know. That's just something that's been playing on my mind recently. Mortality, question mark, is what I would say.
Mortality, question mark. I'm going to go back to a classic, Rapunzel,
Mm.
which, great story, lots of fun. First of all, I mean, just minds of in terms of like fairy tale use of stepmothers stepmothers, what a great thing it is to do, to step in and look after somebody else's children, biological children, make them your own. The idea that they are sort of always inherently evil or suspect, I feel, is unfair to people who function very often as the parents who are there for the, for
Yeah.
the children. Not fair that they're always being murderous in fairy tales, but also just the whole, like, she's never met a guy before, part of it.
Yeah.
Like, it's one thing to fall in love at first sight, but it's another thing to fall in love at first sight of a guy. Like, you know what I mean? It's a bit shooting fish in a barrel. It's a bit like when you're doing a production of theater and there's like 6 people in the cast and you're like, well, he must be the hottest person in the world because he's in this limited space. Like, it's I was reading to my daughter the other day, I'm like, I'm not sure I can condone the rest of this story because he's the first man she's ever seen.
I mean, you can extend that out. You often see it with, people who live in a small village, and a very beautiful woman gets married to the most attractive man in that village, and you sort of like, lady, if you went like 20 miles down the road, your options would grow exponentially. So I guess it's just that, but kind of in microcosm, which is you're stuck in a tower and one person turns up, and that is basically the choice you have.
I did once write a sketch for a review at university that was of the lady in the tower trying to gently let down the prince who's come to rescue her. Like, look, I'm really busy. Got to wash all my hair. Look, really, I've already been rescued. I've got a prince. He's coming back next week. Don't worry. Like, it got rejected from the review that I submitted it for being quote unquote too girl humor. But it did include the line where he's like, "Isn't it uncomfortable up in the tower?" And she said, "Yes, the toilet is just the hole in the floor, so I'm slowly filling up the tower with poo," which I feel still stand up.
So basically, you imagine the tower as just basically an enormous latrine. God, that must have been awful.
Yeah, but she still doesn't want to get rescued by this guy, is the premise of that sketch.
Yeah.
That brings us to the end of this episode of Realms Unknown. Go forth, brave traveler. If you fancy reading some horror that is not too heavy and kind of funny, then try Tom's recommendation of books by Grady Hendrix, particularly Horrorstör, which is set in an IKEA-style store that has been experiencing supernatural phenomena. The book itself is styled like an IKEA catalogue, or try his 2025 release, Witchcraft for Wayward Girls, which is waiting eagerly on Tom's to-be-read pile. My number one recommendation for our subgenre deep dive is Paladin of Souls by Lois, McMaster, Bujold, a firm favorite of mine, but also the Kingfisher series that I am currently churning my way through. And Tom's top tip was the Paladin parody Dungeons & Dragons Honor Among Thieves, the 2023 film that I think was underrated by some. But who are we to question someone so God-touched and pure of heart? All right, Tom Neenan, have you got anything to plug?
As per usual, I encourage people to go to my Instagram, which is TP Neenan on Instagram, and I've got the Etsy store there. Those are sort of the main things, and I'll keep people updated on on various things. There's a thing I've been sort of working on for quite a few years, which that may or may not ever see the light of day, but is sort of taking a step forward this week. So I tell you what, if you just want to keep me in your thoughts this week, then I would be greatly appreciative of that, because it's something I'm very proud of. And like with a lot of these things, it may not materialize, but just have a little thought for me, and maybe one day I can be on here discussing it as an actual thing that exists, which would be fun.
I have all of my bits crossed for you. I am currently, for me, I am in the Swiss Alps about to start my writer's retreat. I run 2 of them this year. We did 1 last year. Maybe we'll do 3 next year. If you want to sign up at patreon.com/Alice Fraser for updates on how it's going, any murders it's a very romantic building. As long as there isn't a murder mystery in it, I think we're fine. But patreon.com/Alice Fraser. I just recorded the audiobook of A Passion for Passion that will be coming out sometime in the next couple of weeks. It's all very exciting. Stay tuned. And I do recommend signing up at the Patreon. You can do it for free. It's just the place that I'm now using as my central point for putting everything out there, because the algorithms aren't what they used to be, and you cannot rely on people who even want to see what you're doing being able to see what you're doing. So patreon.com/Alice Fraser. This is a Bugle podcast and Alice Fraser production. Your editor is Ped Hunter. Your executive producer is Chris Skinner. I'll talk to you again next week.